want to know which planet was causing your suffering? How about Earth?
Hey everyone, Brainflex here, back with a new Chime video. For today's video, I wanted to make a hopefully short-ish, probably like 15-minute guide for Enoki. Now, I am not at the point where I have a fully built-out Enoki because my account simply isn't old enough for that, but I think my Enoki is strong enough to the point where I can clear all the content in the game in a relatively fast time. And this is mainly because Enoki is a very high-risk, high-reward character. In fact, she is so high reward that I'm pretty sure she is by far the strongest DPS in the game if you manage to play fights well. I'm sure there are teams that can also kill the hardest boss in the game in under 30 seconds, but Enoki is probably the only character in the game that can do that without having insanely high investment. She can do it with just pretty good investment. I haven't hit that point yet. Personally, my fastest clear time on the hardest boss in the game is about 45 seconds, which is still really fast considering that 45 seconds was the very first time I cleared that boss. So it really just goes to show that if you play well on her, you can achieve some disgusting DPS. Now, I was going to try and do a live showcase of her abilities, but this game doesn't have any training dummies, and I don't actually know where the easiest solo encounter is in the game, so I'll probably just talk about her abilities, and I'll try and find some clips of gameplay where I can just show you what I mean, instead of having to go into a fight and messing up over and over again, doing like 15 retakes, because I can't do what I need to talk about. So, anyways, with that said, Enoki is a character that is mainly based around operating around her primary resource, which is going to be called Heat. Now, Heat is something that's generated off of her primary attack, her secondary attack, and her counter. She does have another way of generating Heat through her chain attacks, but that's only if you have her first Transcendence, and it doesn't really interact with her other skills the same way her other skills do. So, I guess it's also important to note that her heat generation is heavily diminished if you use the same skill twice in a row, or same method of heat generation twice in a row. So essentially, that's kind of like heat staleness, if you will. For example, if you were to do secondary attack twice in a row, you don't get as much heat from those two secondary attacks. Now, if you do 3 in a row, you get even less from a third one, and then so on and so forth with primary and counters. So because of that, you want to make sure that you're alternating between her heat generation attacks as much as possible, and that's where a lot of her skill comes in, because her primary attack and her secondary attack both only count as a new source of heat generation when you hit the end of the skill cast. Now, her primary attack is going to be a set of 4 auto attacks. The 4th auto attack is the one that generates heat, and you can skip right to that 4th auto attack if you successfully perform a perfect evasion, which is when you hit your dodge spell or dodge skill as an attack comes out. Now this is really important because using those first 3 auto attacks takes up a ton of time. You almost always want to do a dodge auto attack if you can, and that adds to a difficulty because you have to know how the boss hitboxes work in order to dodge through them appropriately in order to get that dodge auto attack to get that heat generation at a quicker pace. Her secondary attack is going to be a pretty fast spin, but while the first three hits do generate a tiny bit of heat if you hit something, you don't actually, again, it doesn't count as a new source of heat generation unless you get that final swing off, and that's where most of the heat comes into play. Now, her counter is going to be pretty straightforward. You just counter, and then you can get heat from that. The one thing I want to note with Enoki is that her counter is a horizontal lunge, so a lot of vertical hitboxes won't interact with it quite properly, and a lot of horizontal hitboxes on bosses that have like really weird hitboxes will interact with your counter in a really bad way, because sometimes you'll counter sideways, but you won't actually get the counter off, and then the boss will hit you with like a stray hitbox off to the side, so just be careful of that. So this means your gameplay for Enoki is going to be using a mixture of your dodge attacks, your secondary attack, and counters, as well as a few of these full auto chains if you have the opportunity to do so, to generate and maintain your heat. Now, your heat is used to hit your strategy skill, which is going to take up most of your heat bar, and it's a front flip that does a ton of damage. Now, I think Enoki's ultimate does way more damage, but because I don't have points in that on her personal awakenings, or yeah, personal potentials rather, I haven't really invested in it. But essentially, the way I play is that I am trying to maintain my heat stacks and generate as much heat as I can so that I can continue hitting strategy over and over again to deal like 1.5 health bars per go, which is really insane considering that, again, my Enoki isn't even near to the potential she could be at. So, Like I said earlier, really high risk high reward because you need to understand how each boss and even each mob works to properly get your damage out. And the worst part about heat, which I probably should have mentioned earlier, is that if you're hit, you lose all of your heat. So messing up a dodge or messing up a counter and getting tagged by a stray attack can set you back immensely in any fight because that means you lose all of your heat gauge. And unless you did that very intentionally, like you used your strategy skill as you're getting hit and you managed to like super armor through that hit, you like let's imagine that you lose all of your heat gauge. You're like back to square one, and now your fight's gonna take like 20 seconds longer, depending on which phase of the fight you got hit in. So with that said, let's go ahead and go into her kit, or rather what I have, I guess, set up in her kit. We can click through her skills again just to go over what she has. You can see that, again, she has 4 stages of melee attack. On the 4th stage, she gets heat, and there's the derivative where when you do a perfect evasion and then attack, you get the 4th immediately. And a really big thing about Enoki is that she actually has really, really high break. I don't know why the game has her break at 1, but if you check out her secondary attack, you can see that she actually has 500 break on that alone. So that means that if you are in a scenario where you have a good amount of heat, if you can use your secondary twice to generate more break, you should, especially if it lets you get your strategy off anyways, despite it being a diminished stale cast. And this is especially helpful in scenarios and boss fights where you know what the boss is going to do next, and you know you don't really want to wait to use your full primary auto combo, and you much rather just use your secondary attack again to do more break, get your strategy skill off, and then continue by dodging or countering their next move. And then her strategy skill, again, can only be used when you have a certain amount of heat stacks. And you'll see that it does a ton of damage. It does 4,800 plus 1,600. 6,400 damage on a skill that is pretty easily spammed once you get the hang of her kit. And you see here that it's also a lot of break on this as well. So, for example, in bosses like Shark and Brave Diver, if you're on top of your game with your break, your secondary skill cast, and your strategy skills, you can break the boss super, super fast, which is essentially why she is so good at clearing fights so quickly. Like I said, her fights can go under 30 seconds against the hardest boss in the game, which is a really absurdly short time when you consider how, I guess, early the game's been out, or how short the game's been out. Now, her ultimate is pretty ridiculous, 11,000 damage. You do need tension 2 for it, and that will usually require you to get at least 2 breaks in without going down in a fight. And if you have certain tension cards, you might even need 3 breaks. And this multiplier is actually kind of fake because I do have this on. Now that I think about it, like I just realized that these numbers are a little off, so it's not actually what I said earlier. It's actually 3,000 plus 1,000, so it's actually 4,000 base for her primary skill, and obviously the values here are a bit lower, and then her ultimate is actually quote-unquote only 7,000 damage. And then you have her chain skill, which is just a generic chain skill, nothing special here. And the big reason why I want to focus on her ultimate skill, and the reason why I kept bringing up like, oh, my Enoki isn't as strong as she could be, is because of her personal character potentials. So I don't know if these potential setups are correct. These are just what I'm running because I am really comfortable with it, and it's what I want. So if you guys don't know, the very first 3 character potentials are all the exact same through any character. The first one is going to be leveling up your damage skills. So essentially, this is why my numbers were higher when we first looked at my skills than they should have been. You can see here that these are what we saw earlier. It's actually a level lower than what it could be, but pretty much these make all of your base skills do a lot more damage for a few potential gems. And this is really important because Enoki uses her full kit when she's fighting. She's not like a character that only uses like 1 or 2 attacks as their main primary focus. She needs everything to be pretty high, and this is your main way of gaining, I guess, conditionless damage on both your ult skill and your strategy skill. Your second and third character potentials, I personally don't think should have any points in them unless you're very specifically playing into XP. Her second skill, again, if you don't know because you haven't clicked on these before, is going to be the defensive stats, HP, defense, and maximum stamina. And it'll go up by 10% or 100 if it's stamina for each point, and it's linear, so maxed out it'll give you 50%, 50%, and 500. And then the very last one is going to be support points, which is essentially useless on Enoki. This is a stat that's really only on niche characters. And if you're curious, gives 20 per point. So at max, it'll be 100, and at 1, it'll be 20. Now, Enoki's first unique potential is going to be Humble Diet, which is going to increase her damage multiplier on her ultimate by a really large margin, but also decrease the amount of heat you get from your skills. And the reason why I have no points in here is just because this is a stagnant or static downside with a very quickly, or again, it's a linear scaling, but the damage multiplier goes up to 250% from 50%. So this is the type of skill that I personally only want to use if I can get to like 4 or level 3 or 4 easily. And you can see that once I max it out, it's doing 250% damage. So my ultimate skill isn't actually, realistically, the baseline for it. While it is only, again, quote unquote, only 7,000, this thing can scale really fast because I probably should have brought this up earlier. Fighting Instincts at max will double the damage on the abilities that you put points in. So if I click here, we can just check out the first skill. You can see that's 100, 100, 200, 500. And then if I were to take out all of my points and then hop into this screen, you'll see it's 50, 50, 100, 250. So Enoki's, and by the way, the action damage and the character, the damage multiplier, they are multiplicative. So I'm not getting 450% more damage. I'm actually getting 500% more damage on my ultimate if I somehow manage to get my skill 1 and skill 4, or potential 1 and potential 4 maxed out. The only reason why I don't have it that way is because I haven't really experimented with her first unique potential that much, but her final unique potential is a universal damage amp to her at the cost of dealing damage to yourself up to a certain point. Now, this is going to be a scaling damage bonus based on how low you are. So that's the reason why you hurt yourself when you attack, because otherwise you would have to get hit by enemies to trigger the bonus, and that's kind of weird. And this is actually a skill that scales both the detriment and the bonus, because the detriment, or rather the bonus, is directly linked to the detriment. So you can see here that self-damage goes up to 80%, so I can do up to 20% of my own HP. And when I get dealt 20%, or around 20% damage dealt to myself or lower, I'm getting 60% attack damage, or 60% damage bonus on everything. And then as I go up, if I were to go up to a max level, you can see that I can drop down to 40% HP, and my maximum damage done will be, or my maximum damage bonus will be 180%. So I'm almost doubling all of my damage. Actually, no, this is almost tripling all my damage in exchange for starting every fight and playing every fight at about 40% HP, which is a very big downside, obviously. But if you're good at dodging, like, again, like I mentioned earlier, you don't want to be hit as Enoki. So if you're not getting hit, being low is completely irrelevant. So that's the reason why I kept bringing up again, like, oh, I'm not at my peak potential, because Enoki's peak potential is having a mixture of all 3 of these skills, so that not only will her strategy skills do damage, but the one time she ults, the fight will just be over. Period. So with that said, we can go into her Patimons. My Patimons are a bit all over the place just because I've been trying to farm Fractal Vice, and again, my account is pretty fresh, so I don't actually have great Fractal Vice, or rather, I don't have great Patimon components to actually make a really good build. So I'll just talk about the stats that I want and the stats I do have. So you see here that I have 2 golden lines. If you don't know how to get this, you essentially need to get par, which is the final Bero item that he sells for 1 million Kane, which is really expensive, but really worth it once you're at this point in the game, because without the par, the best you're getting is going to be gold, purple, blue on your Patimon pieces. And so the way par works, just a very brief overview, is that it chooses one, you choose one of your Patimons, and then the first line of any future tier 8 Patimon you roll while it's active will be forced from that Patimon that you selected. So if I were to go into Fractal Vice and I selected this specific Patimon, and then I activated par on it, then the first line of all my Patimons in tier 8 would get either attack 4+, crit rate 4, or defense 2, which is how I have this abomination of shield damage reduction as a first line. So Yeah, I guess a very quick Patamon overview is that they can roll a lot of stats, and one of the stats they can roll is going to be character skills. And the reason why I don't have any character skills on my Enoki is because I think character skill buffing is really worthless, because as you could tell from us going through the potentials earlier, we have ways of increasing character action levels. We don't have ways of increasing character attack stats or crit damage stats. So that's why I have so many lines of crit damage, attack, and crit rate. And I have some random trash lines in here because I didn't roll perfect lines. So yeah, for Patimons, if you're just new to the game and you're like struggling by with like tier 6 Patimons or even tier 4 Patimons, as long as there's one good line of attack, crit damage, and honestly, even Barbacoa Blade or one of Enoki's personal like character lines, like that's totally fine for the early game. But you really want these attack, crit damage lines. And I think as you get further into the game, the crit lines also start becoming less important because you have a lot of ways to get crit through tension cards, which I'll go over in a bit. So yeah, my first card, or my first Patamon, is going to be attack crit. Second Patamon is going to be attack crit damage multiplier. And then my third one is going to be crit with attack. And if you go to my stats details, you can see I have 33.5% crit, 85% crit damage. And then unfortunately, it doesn't show the percentage on attack, but you can see my attack is really, really high because of all the multipliers. And then for tension cards, the tension cards I am currently running are going to be the very basic setup. Oh, this is the wrong screen because I don't have a... I'm running Enoki solo, so I don't have anything here. I just make the thing anyways. My tension cards are going to be the very basic setup of full party plus strike zone. If you don't have strike zone, then full party isn't as good, but you should still run full party. If you're lucky enough to have strike zone, rather, you always combine these because strike zone gives you unity, which will double the effectiveness of full party once you're at that point. And then I've been running the ferocity card because it's a very noob friendly tension card because you get a free revive, and if you're learning Enoki, you will be dying a lot, so you kind of need this to actually learn fights properly or at all. And then I'm also playing this thing called Maximizer, if I can find it. And what Maximizer does is it essentially gives you crit chance when you counter somebody, so maximization. And control, yeah, when you counterattack, which you'll be doing a lot as Enoki, you'll gain crit rate, which is really good for rounding out and making her attacks more consistent. And then the final thing that I personally run, and this will be very liable to change once the patch hits with all the tension card reworks, I'm running Capable Guy Theory, because Capable Guy Theory doesn't actively consume your tension as you're using it. It consumes it once, and I don't think the effect is that great, but it's definitely noticeable in fights like the drone that like has a million missiles and gigantic lasers, because you can actually dodge through a laser and not get hit as your iframe runs out for some reason. So this is what I'm currently running. And then post-patch, the dream is to be able to run Detonator, because hopefully they remove this final effect, which will make Detonator broken. And then Thrill is kind of made for Enoki, but the issue is that this final line that says when the effect is active, consume 80 tension, that actually triggers off of her self-damage. So if you ever go into a fight with Enoki with Thrill, and then you hit a mob, and you started the fight with preemptive, so you have tension 2, and then you see her tension immediately drop, that's because she's bugged with this. So when she hits something, she eats all her tension instantly to reduce her own tension, to reduce her own self-damage, which is only like 80 damage. So maybe post-patch Thrill will be really, really good on her, but right now Thrill is kind of really bad. Besides that, for the characters you want to party with, the very generic duo that I run with is going to be Geo and Yo. Geo's first character potential is going to be kind of the easiest source of defense reduction in the game. So again, Enoki does a ton of damage, so defense reduction is insanely good on her. And then I run Yo because Yo is kind of a jack of all trades. The AI actually pilots him relatively decently, and he has very good break values, so you can actually break mobs a lot easier even if you're fumbling. And he has some random healing on his kit, which is always nice because I don't have the Enoki card that denies healing. So having more healing, again, as a newer player, is really helpful. Now, I was running with Tsuruko and Suki at the start of the game just because I had them earlier. And the reason why I was running Suki is because her chain attack gives crit. So I was thinking, oh, I'll start all of my chain attacks with Suki so that I can end with a boosted strategy skill with Enoki. And obviously Sudoku, if you've used her, you know that her first character potential has increased healing. So I was using Sudoku as my healer so that I could actually learn fights. So yeah, a lot of this, I haven't really, okay, before I end the video, I haven't really tested the other characters, so I don't know if there's any other crazy combinations they can go for. All I will say is that I do not like aggro characters on Enoki. It's really hard to counter units or counter enemy attacks when they're not facing you, so I would suggest straying away from Todoroki, Q, and Roku, just because it'll make your life a lot harder because you're not actually getting heat stacks like you should be. So yeah, that'll be the video. Looks like it's 6 minutes longer than I want it to be, but hopefully the information was useful. And yeah, I really want to make Enoki like way stronger so I can show you better clips, but I'll probably follow up the video with a few boss runs just so you can see how strong she is going later into the week. Yeah, thank you for watching. Hope you guys have a good day or night wherever you are, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye-bye.